Welcome to Finding Holiness, where we delve into timeless Torah wisdom, revealing the sacred in everyday moments. Join us on a journey to elevate your spirituality and discover holiness in every aspect of life. I'm your host, Rabbi David Kadosh, and together, let's embark on a path of spiritual exploration. I hope you enjoy this next episode. We left off yesterday in the middle of a section here with regard to the levels of Hagala. We're going to continue that chapter today. Tafshilei taref shenimsaim b'kli shlishi. If you have a dish of tray foods that was found in a kli shlishi, so now you have it's not in the utensil that it was cooked in. It's not in the bowl, in the big bowl. It's now in the smaller bowl. Lamnot shehem chamim meod. They could be that tray soup could be still very hot. Kevan shekvar itrachaku mimekor hachom. Since there's already been a distance from the original heat where it started to your third vessel. Enam nichshavim kemavleim umaflitim ta'amim. We don't consider it that it absorbs any flavor or emits any flavor. V'lachen hakelim shebao imam b'maga enam tzrichim achshara be'agala eladai le'achshiram b'adachar. In those situations, if your treif soup made it to the third vessel, your third bowl, there's no need to kosher with regards to hagala. It just needs a good rinse. Sakin shechatchu ba basar taref roteach al ha'esh. So let's say you have a steak. Your steak is pan frying there. It's right on the pan. That's called on ha'esh, or it's on the barbecue. That's also on ha'esh. And you want to check if it's done. So some people, no chef would like this, but you want to cut it through to see if it's done the way you want it to be done. So you take the knife and you slice a steak, and then you realize that the steak that you put on is terefa. Okay, you didn't know. So now you took the knife and you sliced it while it was on the barbecue. Roteach al ha'esh. Tzricha libun. That knife requires libun because it touched an item that was directly on the fire. It absorbed food that was directly on the fire. To kosher that knife requires libun. Ve'im chatchut habasar chatachot habasar le'achar she'isiru oto me'ha'esh. But if you cut the treif steak after you removed it from the fire, so while it was on your plate, which is a more common circumstance, hasakin tzricha hagala. In that case, no longer does it require libun. It requires hagala to be dipped in the pot. V'chen mazleg, the same thing with a fork. Shenatzo b'ma'afet taref. You poked your meat or you poked your baked goods to see if it was done, and while it was in the oven, tzarich libun. That fork requires libun. But after it was taken out, then you realize, then you dipped it, then you poked it in, then it needs hagala. We're going to see in the next chapter that this is not so pashut with, especially to us the Sfaradim. It's not so pashut if you take a regular fork that you used to eat with and use that to poke. Because it might fall into the category of having to kosher your item in the way that it's mostly been used. But we're going to see that in the next chapter. Marak taref tzonen. If you have cold treif soup, sheshaha b'meshech yemama bekli. That treif soup was sitting in a pot, cold, but it's been there for over 24 hours. Yes omrim shakeli tzarich hagala. Some say that the pot that the soup is sitting in requires hagala, requires to be koshered. And the reason is, al pi aklal kavush kimvushal. There is a rule that says that something that is pickled is like it is cooked. To pickle something is to leave it in its current state for over 24 hours. It actually has a power to kimvushal. It's like cooking. So any of the vegetables that's in there with the tray foods that's sitting in that pot is ki'ilu kimushal. V'chen noagim leorot lechatchila, and that's how we generally teach lechatchila, that we would require hagala for that pot. B'shat hatzorech, in times of need, efshar le'akel u'lachshik kli zechuchit u'matechet b'adacha. If it was a metal item or a glass item, like we spoke in the past, we could be mekil and just say a rinse is fine since it's cold. Hoy ve'yadu she'enam bolim, because we know that they don't absorb much. Rabim noagim lechatchila le'achshir et kol hakelim atzrichim hagala b'kli rishon. היינו במים לותחים שעל האש, משום חרושים שמא ישתמשו בהם בכלי ראשון ושכחו. Alright, so the general custom is, of all these things that we went through, that, okay, if it was only a kli shani, you only need a kli shani to kosher it. The general minhag is that we kosher things on a kli rishon on the fire. We take a pot, we boil it with water, okay? It's boiling while on the fire, and that's what we put everything into it. That's the general rule that we do, because we're worried that maybe that item that you're kosher not on the fire, okay, maybe it was used, and you're going to make a mistake. Ulam kasher barur. When it's clear, but if you know for sure that this item became non-kosher with a kli shani, and that's the only thing it became non-kosher with, okay, you could use a kli shani to kosher it. It doesn't need to be on the fire. Okay. Nechleku, this is now the third part. Part 3. Kli shamshu bo beramot shonot. Nechleku is an important chapter, especially for Sfaradim and Ashkenazim. נחלקו הפוסקים בשאלה כיצד להכשיר כלי שישמשו בו בטרף ברמות שונות של שימוש. How do we kosher an item that was used for terefa in different ways? כגון מזלג, like a fork, שבדרך כלל משתמשים בו במאכלים צוננים שאינה ידו שולט בהם. Normally you use this fork with colder foods, okay? Not heat that is yad שולטת בו. שהכשרתו בהדחה. And you would, like we said, to way to kosher anything that's been trafed through cold foods is rinse. That's what we said. ולפעמים, once in a while, משתמשים בו בתבשילים לוהטים. Sometimes you put it in a little bit hotter while it's you put it while it's cooking. Okay, that would require הכשרתו בעגלה. ולעיתים רחוקות, and even more less often times, more seldom times. משתמשים בו לצורך צלייה. You use this fork when something's roasting. שהכשרתו בליבון. So now the same fork, most of the time it's with cold food. Sometimes it's with cooked food. And very little times it's with roasted food. So now how do I kosher this fork? So this is a big machloket between Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. יש אומרים, this is the Ashkenazi halacha, שצריך להכשירו כפי תשמישו החמור. We have to go according to the most strict. Since this fork absorbed a very deep absorption, therefore you have to kosher it in that level. And there are those who say, this is Faradim, you have to kosher it the way it's mostly used. We're not worried for that one time that you happen to stab your fork into the item on the fire. Because after 24 hours, anyways, the tam is pagum and cannot make other foods not kosher. You still have to kosher the utensil. Okay, so you have the two opinions here. Lechatchila, he says, yesh lachmir leachshir et hakeli kefi tashmishua hamur. Lechatchila, you should go to the highest level, like the Ashkenazim. Ubishat hatzorech, and in times of need, kasher leachshir et hakeli kefi shimusho hamur. When it's difficult to do so, efshar leakel leachshiro kefi rov tashmisho. You could do it according to the way it's mostly used. Ledugma, כלי שהכשרתו כפי תשמישו החמור תתחייב ליבון שעלול להזיק לו, אפשר להכשירו בעגלה כפי רוב תשמישו. So he just gave an example over there. רוב ומיעוט לעניין זה נקבעים רק לפי השימושים האסורים, כגון מזלג שרגילים בו לאכול בו טרף בצונן, ופעם אחת ערבו בו טרף בכלי ראשון. So what we spoke about here is about items like a fork that most of the time it's eaten, it was used for cold, and then it just happened to be me'arev taref in a kli rishon while cooking. Haksharato kirov tashmisho ba'adacha, then you would rinse it. Aval, im medubar b'mazrek shetamid regilim lechol bo machalim kesherim betzonan. Okay, but if we're talking about a kosher fork, okay, meaning one of your own forks that you normally it's kosher and it's always eaten cold. Upam achat irvo bo taref b'kli rishon al ha'esh. And then that you use that kosher meat fork, and now you put it into treif in a kli rishon the fire. Haksharato be'hagala. The hakshara to make it kosher, you need hagala b'kli rishon. Hoy verak hashimush b'kli rishon haya shimush asur shemasich hakshara, because that's how it became asur. It's only when you're dealing things that are totally treif, always treif. Someone gives you a goy gives you a set of cutlery. Okay, you know it's all taref. And the question is, how do I kosher this cutlery? So you can assume rov tashmisho. Okay, hagala. You don't have to assume that maybe one of those forks touched poked a steak on the fire, and therefore you need libun. So now, with regard to this law, this applies a lot during Pesach, because on Pesach, people that want to kosher their utensils, okay, on Pesach, all of my cutlery is terefa, right? It's all not kosher. If I want to use my everyday utensils for Pesach, then everything is not kosher on Pesach. I need to kosher them. So it all has a status of not kosher. So how do I kosher them? Well, if you're Sfaradi, Shulchan Aruch, Rav Ovadia, and Rav Masas, there are some Sfaradim that hold differently, but most of the Sfaradim hold Rov Tashmisho. So if I want to kosher my cutlery on Pesach, okay, to use on Pesach, I do Hagala. I put them in boiling water. Okay, most of it, that's how I use it, hot food or whatever, Hagala, finish, all done. But for Ashkenazim, if they want to kosher their cutlery, we have to assume the highest level. Maybe one of that forks, maybe one of those knives went there and poked a meat on the grill, and therefore they would require libun for all of the cutlery that they wish to kosher. So that's actually a very big distinction between the Sfaradim and the Ashkenazim with regards to koshering a keli that has a status of terefa and that you want to make kosher. Bezat Hashem will continue tomorrow.